All right, welcome back to AI for Healthcare. I hope you're having an amazing time. Our next session will be led by Vignesh Shetty. He is the VP and GM Enterprise Imaging Applications at GE Helthcare. Please join me in welcoming him to our virtual stage.
Thanks, Patricia. Hey, everybody. So what I intend to do while I pull up my screen is in the next 20 minutes, talk about some of the non-obvious second-order effects of running AI adoption and applications at scale in GE Healthcare. So just to dwell into it a little bit more, there's AI adoption that's becoming increasingly widespread to solve both clinical and operational challenges in the radiology care pathway. But what we want to do is to make sure that the patient is kept front and center. We also want to be able to identify scaling challenges as well as solutions to ensure that the necessary trust, confidence, security, and the ethical foundations are in place. And lastly, we want to invert and distill some of the key lessons we've learned from prior transformations from other industries, whether that's telecommunications, networking, cloud, mobile devices, and other technologies that have adopted AI at scale, what they did well, what landmines to avoid that led to unabated sprawl. So, but first, let's zoom out a little bit. As most of us know, there's about 7.7 billion humans inhabiting the planet today. And just taking one disease as a case in point, we've got lung cancer. That is the second leading cause of death amongst humans after cardiac diseases. Right? The only silver lining with lung cancer is that the number of lung cancer cases are actually declining, largely because of people increasingly quitting smoking, but also in part due to early detection of some of these lung cancer cases, thanks to advances in AI and medical imaging. That said, it's still something that AI has opportunities to dramatically improve survivability around. As you know, 1 in 15 people will get lung cancer. I think the ratio is about 1 in 15 for men and 1 in 17 for women. And 1 in 29 men will not survive. The ratio is about 1 in 41 for women. So it is something that AI, while it's made strides to help combat, leaves significant opportunities for us to be able to dramatically improve these ratios for the better. Now meet Joe. Joe is a 40-year-old male. He's a non-smoker. He's active in sports. He's into squash, tennis, swimming. A couple of weeks ago, he had pain in his chest. So he went to his general practitioner and told him about it, these symptoms. The general practitioner did carry out a triage and said, this doesn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. So he sent him back. So last weekend, when he went out swimming, he was breathless. This is not something that Joe's seen for the last 34 years he's been swimming. So he went back again. He booked an appointment. It took him a week, went to the GP. The GP referred him to an asthma clinic this time, where they did a bunch of checks and they sent him back saying everything looks good, there's no fluid. But then this continued, the symptoms persisted. He had trouble breathing, cough. And so he took a second opinion from another GP. And at that point, they did a chest x-ray, and a junior registrar walked up to him and said, I think you might have lung cancer. Now put yourself in Joe's shoes. Right? Joe, in all fairness, is not thinking about AI. What he's worried about is how does he navigate this complex pathway within radiology or oncology to be able to first get an accurate screening, an accurate diagnosis. And if it turns out that what that junior registrar told him is true, what's the best treatment option? He's thinking about whether he needs to go back and share that with his family, his near and dear ones. Is this a false alarm? Now, this is one of the first second-order non-obvious effects I was referring to when it comes to AI. Most of us, when we think of AI in the healthcare space, tend to assume or zero in on the part about AI that helps with automatically detecting a lesion or a tumor, quantifying it, annotating it, and then being able to report with something like an Alexa like interface. That's necessary, but by no means sufficient. What you've got to do is put yourself in Joe's shoes and look at the entire picture of the pathway and see where AI can help. From Joe's standpoint, he needs to be able to figure out who is the GP or the specialist that can provide him access to care, high quality care, and reduce his time to appointment so that he doesn't have to wait 3 or 4 weeks. He doesn't mind traveling a little further out if the time to appointment is shrunk. And he's counting on the provider. Once he selects that provider, the provider is going to count on AI or artificial intelligence to be able to help schedule Joe to the closest facility that provides the highest quality care for the symptoms he's exhibiting. Also be able to select using AI the right protocol on the scanners, assuming he needs to go through a CT scan, or in the case of staging, a PET or an MRI, what's the right protocol or CDs to be used. Then when Joe comes in, after all of this, can you position Joe correctly so that you take one scan, it has the best image quality at the lowest dose, so that he doesn't have to come back again for a retake. And then make sure that the examination parameters are all set up. All of the supplies are in place. The right staff, the right qualifications are in place. These are decisions that every provider has to make, and AI can play a big role in helping alleviate the cognitive load on both Joe and the provider. Only then do you come into scanning. And that's when you want to reduce scan times, reduce the amount of dose Joe is subjected to, while maintaining or enhancing image quality. And then after the scan, you end up doing the reconstruction, the post processing, and then ultimately can use AI to create intelligent, smart reports for the radiologist to be able to read. That is the sort of work that we're looking for AI to help facilitate. Right? Now, take the analogy from the ride sharing industry. We know that ride sharing is not only about saving time, saving money, or increasing safety. With ride sharing apps like an Uber or a Lyft, we can get all of those with optimized Google Maps based routes, which help save time. You could have carpooling, which saves money, or even location based engagement that helps increase safety. But what we as customers, like Joe in this case for healthcare, really value is the reduction in uncertainty, so that we can now sit inside, enjoy a cup of our tea or coffee with friends and family, and then step out only when our ride has arrived. Now, contrast that with years gone by where you had to wait outside and brave the cold and the rain in anticipation of the cab turning around the corner. Now, imagine a 20x improvement in both Joe's experience and the provider experience with things like scheduling, reducing scan times, and reporting using a cohesive ecosystem of partners. That's what we are after. That's the excitement that gets me to work every morning. Now, just let's dig in a little deeper on what the possibilities are. As you know, a virus changed everything we knew about scheduling. For instance, because of COVID, a lot of elective procedures have been postponed. So something like a screen for Joe that typically would have taken us a week now may take months or several weeks because we're prioritizing, rightfully so, COVID patients. Even for the provider, the cost of inaction is significant. A scheduled exam when a patient does not show up means that there's a delay to being able to diagnose. Somebody like Joe would not be diagnosed. So we're losing time and losing lives. There's also the question of staff being either idle at some pockets in time or weeks and days at end. And then certain other cases, they're being too busy to breathe. So how do you make sure you minimize variation in demand or capacity for staff? You also want to take care of your equipment. Make sure they're utilized actively throughout the day, every single day of the week. But most importantly, what providers, payers, and patients care about is how do you minimize the opportunity for missed care so that you can increase access to care regardless of race, gender, equitably. And this is a huge area and an opportunity for AI to help. How so? What if AI could predict missed care opportunities effectively and say, hey, the likelihood of Vignesh showing up on this day is lower than that day based on my past history, based on weather details, a bunch of extraneous, exogenous, and endogenous information. It's massive. And then you combine that with other aspects of AI around scan time, reporting, you can make several orders of magnitude improvement in the entire care pathway. And that to me is really the first fallacy that we should look at overcoming. Don't just look at individual point products like that solve for a part of that workflow, whether that's scheduling only or scheduling or reporting or even scan time. That's important. You want the best of breed for each of those segments of that path flow, but you also need something that orchestrates and creates a seamless tapestry that allows handoffs to occur right from the head end of the workflow to the tail end. And so if you've taken care of scheduling, what you can now get into is the actual scan. So let's go back to Joe. Joe is claustrophobic. Now, in some cases, in case of lung cancer, we use a PET CT for a lot of staging. In some cases, we do use MR as well. In Joe's case, and even if this was a 6-year-old, they do not want to be spending 45 minutes to 1 hour on this particular inside this MRI machine. So what if you could increase the patient experience or improve that significantly with AI-based solutions? Like at GE Helthcare, we just recently launched something called Recon DL, which dramatically reduces acquisition time by about 30 to 50%. What that means is a huge improvement in patient satisfaction. Joe spends about 50% less time than he would have. And you do this, most importantly, without impacting image quality. So you do not want to compromise on that. You do not want retakes. You do not want people to come back again because that's lost time, lost lives. Also, for the providers and the payers, what this means is you're increasing both your capacity, which means you could do more scans per day, more reimbursements for the provider, as well as, more importantly, for everybody, increase access to care. So this is how you're stitching AI and how the role it's playing right from scheduling to scan to reporting, right? Now, again, if you do all of this right, you're straddling the entire ecosystem of partners. You can't do this alone. No single company, whether GE or any of its other vendors out there, can do this alone. So you want to be able to make sure that you create a healthy ecosystem of applications, both built in-house as well as built elsewhere, AI or otherwise, with keeping the patient outcomes in mind. And those could be efficiency, quality of care for someone like Joe, and even access to care. Now, if done right, we would help significantly get back time, energy for everybody involved. So we have a slew of startups that are working in this space. I'll touch upon that in more detail. They help with scheduling, triaging. They can even help with decision supports, aka the protocoling conversation I had earlier. How do you pick the right protocol for the right procedure for a given patient? And once a scan is done, how can you help the radiologist quantify the disease, track progression of the disease or the lack of it thereof, annotate it, and ultimately report it? Each of this has huge opportunities for improvement, and AI can play a massive role there, right? And what we've actually seen as customers, and as providers, is about a huge improvement in productivity to the tune of about 30 to 50% improvement in exam time, as well as about a 70% improvement in no-show rates using things like smart scheduling, as well as error reductions, which means less retakes, a better patient experience, and greater efficiency for providers and payers. So if you string together the pearls very well using AI and have AI play a big role in both clinical as well as operational workflows, right from dictation, diagnostics, and imaging, there's going to be a huge upside. You're going to see significant advances going forward. The good news is there's huge investments happening in this space. As per 2019, and this number has only grown since then, there's been about $4 billion of investment that's gone into healthcare AI-based startups. There are, as we speak, 350 to 400 startups that are actively working at different parts of this pathway, just talking about radiology. And 80% of the decision makers within healthcare, both providers and payers, see investments or their adoption of AI is growing significantly in the next 5 years. So what's there not to like? However, there's a catch. And this is, again, something that we can learn from other industries that have gone through this transformation in the past. If you are, put yourself in the shoes of a provider, they're already struggling with a huge backlog because of the pandemic, because of various other understaff, lack of budget, lack of key expertise. And they just do not have the resources to go vet each of these AI applications individually. There's a lot of things that need to be done and gotten right for those outcomes that I alluded to earlier to be realized. You've got to go through security assessments. You've got to have detailed project plans involving the technologists, the IT folks within your hospital to ensure that you execute to plan. You've got to be able to configure and integrate with your existing workflow. Not to mention qualifying vendors, having POs, setting up, creating supply chain arrangements. It's it's the order of months, and you're talking about one app. Now, if you look at the entire pathway, you're not going to have a one size fits all application. What that means is you really need an ecosystem of about 100 of applications to be able to realize all of your outcomes. And in order to get there, you've got to be able to have a selection committee in each provider. They've got to look at all alternatives that exist, evaluate them, select them, do a due diligence assessment, do background check references, and then once you've zeroed in on someone, be able to host that, understand their deployment models, negotiate pricing, deal with all of those invoices that come from each of these individual vendors, planning the execution on the IT side, and ultimately you end up deploying the app. So you see the challenge associated with this, right? So what is the solution? Again, this is where we can learn vicariously as a team, right? So if you think about it, outside of healthcare, in the telecommunications and the networking industry, they've gone through this revolution before, AI adoption. So what they did was they started with best of breed individual products in the 1990s. And that evolved to a preferred vendor model in the early to mid 2000s. So you identified key vendors in each of these industries that sort of you could go to and trust them to be able to get the job done. Now, what they realize is that also has scaling impediments. And so they switched from having a preferred vendor model to a preferred ecosystem model, where you have a combination of in-house products that are built by a vendor, but also trusted partners, both internal and external, that they work with seamlessly to offer the outcomes that their customers desire. And healthcare, I expect, would go down the same path. Right? The solution to scaling for the problems I described earlier would be to define an ecosystem. And in GE Healthcare's case, we've got the Edison ecosystem as an example, but you've got others as well, where you have both a marketplace that helps you discover what the right applications are. Because as we move from an area of scarcity in AI applications to an era of abundance, discovery becomes a key point of leverage. So being able to have a streamlined marketplace to find, to try, to buy both G as well as non-G applications is going to be key. And then you also want to be able to have the customers simplify their deployment, their integration, their billing models, and the ability to integrate into their existing workflows. That is definitely going to be the path forward in my mind, just like it has been in other industries. At the same time, you also want to look at the supply side of the equation, which is while you have finished products on the marketplace, you make it easy to try, buy, test, select, down select. How do you encourage a vibrant community of developers, folks who build these apps, to also embrace the ecosystem, right? And if you do this right, you create positive network effects. That developer A benefits from developer B, C, D being on this ecosystem, and they can build mashups on top of each other, where each incremental member that's added to the network adds value to everybody else. So it becomes a flywheel that gets set in motion. And what the ecosystem provider, in this case, the vendor, can do is help simplify the vetting, the identification, the analysis, make sure there are appropriate guardrails in place to build and integrate, and then give these developers access to a customer and a beta pilot so that we can distribute it. If we do this right, this changes everything. So instead of it being an application where each app is a new project, and the provider in this case has to make a decision for each new app, you can now seamlessly orchestrate across applications, right from scheduling to protocoling to scanning to annotation to reporting. More importantly, you have one trusted partner, and you can have a wide selection of startups that provide best of breed, but you have one invoice. And that is something that I think a lot of our customers are asking for. And I do believe that's going to be a huge second order effect, the galvanization of an ecosystem. That said, as I said in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So you want to make sure you avoid unintended consequences of an ecosystem. For one, while you want to cater to all of your stakeholders, shareholders, employees, patients, etc., if you have to make hard trade-offs, design with the safety of the patient in mind. Do not compromise on that because they trust you. And that's a good segue to my second point. Be a trusted steward of both data and insights. Make sure that whatever applications you bring on board, their algorithms are transparent, they are robust, which means they can work across regions, geographies, etc. They can be potentially audited, and they're reproducible. The results are reproducible. And very important, you do not want your algorithms or your models to either create, amplify, or propagate bias, because those are the second unintended consequences of an ecosystem if you don't think through this. So for GE Healthcare, those are the key principles we abide by. Now, what I wake up every day excited about the fact that our teams and others in the space are building a future where healthcare is both personalized, it's prevention oriented, and affordable. And we can make a difference to patients and providers in the moments that matter by offering both prescriptive as well as predictive AI insights to improve both clinical as well as operational workflows. So looking forward to your questions, excited to be a part of this. Thanks for having me, Trika.
Wow, thank you so much, Vignesh. If you could stop sharing your screen, the audience is giving you a huge virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you sharing with us today. For the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and check out our awesome AI exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.